On July 4th, 1804, a boisterous Independence Day celebration took place at Fraunces Tavern, the convivial New York City watering hole where George Washington had bid an emotional farewell to his officers in 1783. Already nearly a century old, the brick building on the corner of Pearl and Broad had housed a tavern since before the Revolution and was one of the most popular gathering spots in the city.
Seated side by side in places of honor on one of the long tables were two men who served on my staff during the war and whose destinies had been intertwined ever since, Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr.
Hamilton said. Burr raised his head and gazed intently at him, seemingly lost in thought. They had much in common, those two. Both were orphans, Revolutionary War heroes, lawyers, and politicians. In addition, they were two of the most well-known men in America. Burr, after all, was the sitting vice president under Thomas Jefferson, just a heartbeat away from the presidency. Alex had served President Washington as the nation's first Secretary of Treasury, creating out of the whole cloth the systems that formed the underpinnings of the nation's economy. They were longtime rivals in the cockpit of New York politics, where they had been sometimes worked together, but far more often battled each other with increasing loathing. Once they had been friends, but no shred of that friendship survived.
At any point in the evening, did a look pass between them? A grimace, a glare, a half-smile? A clue to their innermost thoughts. The revelers celebrating around them had no way of knowing that the two men shared a dark secret, one kept well hidden that night. Their differences had reached the point of no return, and they had come to the mutual conclusion that there was only one way to settle them, in a duel, with pistols, in 1 week's time.
Good. On Tuesday morning, July 11th, 1797, Hamilton was trembling with rage. Who was the target exactly? None other than future President James Monroe, who had just returned from Europe upon being recalled as minister to France. When Hamilton accused Monroe of being a liar, the Virginian became equally incensed. The two men leapt out of their chairs and began screaming at each other.
You say I represent falsely? You're a scoundrel.
Alex, don't!
I will meet you like a gentleman.
I'm ready. Get your pistol.
The subject of the angry confrontation was the Maria Reynolds affair. The exchange took place 7 years to the day before the duel in Weehawken. Ironically, it would be none other than Aaron Burr to make sure it did not lead to bloodshed.
Okay, come on, guys. This is ridiculous.
Hamilton's stunned wife, Eliza, pregnant for the 6th time, found that her husband's sexual escapades were the talk of the town. His public confession must have been a nightmare for a woman who naturally shied away from the spotlight. At the same time, she was outraged at the attackers who had brought her husband low. She stood by her man. Her sister, Angelica, wrote a consoling note.
Tranquilize your kind and dear heart.
She advised.
Merit, virtue, and talents must have enemies and are always exposed to envy.
Eliza could have avoided the nightmare of such attacks, wrote Angelica, only if she had
married into a family less near the sun. But then you would have missed the pride, the pleasure, and the nameless satisfactions.
Eliza burned all of her correspondence, so it is impossible to know what degree of consolation she was able to take from her sister's words.
Congress rescinded all treaties with France and passed legislation calling for President Adams to raise a 10,000-man provisional army. American naval vessels were given hunting license to attack French ships, and soon they were exchanging cannon fire at sea. The conflict became known as the Crusade War because the Cimmerian conflict never quite erupted into full-fledged warfare.
President Adams appointed George Washington, then in retirement at Mount Vernon, as commander of the army. Washington reluctantly agreed to accept the position, but only if Adams would name Hamilton as the second in command. Adams had come to loathe Hamilton, considered his fellow Federalist vain, flamboyant, and conniving. He had not forgiven Hamilton for what he deemed a betrayal during the presidential election. The Reynolds affair had convinced the potential Adams that Hamilton was a man of debauched morals. He could never get over Hamilton's illegitimate birth in the West Indies, referring to him more than once a Creole bastard. Hamilton was the last person he wanted to make Washington's second in command. What's more, Hamilton had only served as a colonial during the Revolution, and Adams couldn't see why he should promote him over others who had commanded large bodies of troops as generals. However, Washington insisted, wrote Adams an extraordinary letter entitling Hamilton's leadership abilities.
Okay, Alex, screw this. I'm done.
Money problems were weighing over more heavily on Burr. Land speculation and lavish lifestyle and efforts to bail out several friends had left him deeply in debt. One deal that was spectacularly bad left him owing $80,000, roughly equivalent to $2 million today, to a client of Alexander's, Hamilton. He was living under threat of financial ruin, which may have motivated what came next, a complicated scheme that would cost him his seat in legislature and severely damage his fragile new alliance with Hamilton.
Angelica recently returned from Europe with a nice fellow. His name was John Barker Church. I had a close relationship with him. He was a man of fortune and integrity, of strong mind, very exact, very active, and very much a man of business.
Hamilton lobbied energetically for the project. He joined Burr in a meeting with the mayor of New York and put his pen to work, as usual, to lay out compelling arguments why such a company would benefit New York. City officials got behind the plan, and as the final days of legislative session ticked down, March 1799, Burr persuaded his fellow lawmakers to charter the Manhattan Company as a New York corporation.
The bank business was probably enough to dispel any positive feelings Hamilton had developed for Burr. Then, that summer, Burr made it personal. He challenged Hamilton's brother-in-law, John Barker Church, to a duel.
Alexander Hamilton had challenged perhaps half a dozen men to duels. Aaron Burr had never challenged anyone until now. It was not his style.
This, sir, is the first time in my life that I've condescended, pardon my expression, to refute calumny.
Why now? Burr likely believed that Hamilton was the source of rumors going around about his role in the Holland deal, and saw an opportunity to send Hamilton a message.
On March 31st, 1800, New York was all focused on one event, a murder trial. The trial lasted 3 days. Enormous, rubbernecking crowds flocked to the courthouse. Those who squeezed inside could hear people screaming.
Yeah,
it was the trial of the century.
But,
give or take, it was a new century after all.
Be on our side on this, jury.
To defend the beleaguered defendant was the All-Star team, led by New York's two most illustrious attorneys, Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. It was a rare case of Hamilton deciding that less was more. The jury deliberated for 5 minutes before declaring Levi Weeks not guilty.
The election of 1800 was one of the most tumultuous in American history, a spectacle that made even the Weeks trial seem tame. It ended in a photo finish never duplicated in American politics, changed the direction of the country, and left mine and Hamilton's reputation in shreds.
Listen to me, people. If you want real change in this country, well, you'll vote for me. Don't believe this charlatan. He knows not what he speaks but me. I will represent everyone in this country. Everyone, do you hear?
No, don't vote for him. Vote for me. I have more training in politics than him. Don't vote for him.
More training in politics? People don't believe him. He doesn't know what he's talking about. No, vote for Jefferson. Look, it starts with J and ends with N. Vote for me. Burr. Bad Burr. Bad.
The Federalists feared that Jefferson would ruin the economic system that had so carefully constructed. If this were to happen, the nation's trade and commerce would be ruined. In the midst of the tumultuous presidential race, another momentous event took place. The federal government moved from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to Washington, D.C. The new capital was still just a sleepy village dotted with unfinished government buildings and construction sites.
Since the Constitution didn't differentiate between votes for president or vice president, Jefferson and Burr had tied. Each had 73 electoral votes. The calls for party unit had proven more successful than people imagined. Not a single electoral vote had withdrawn a vote for Burr. Under the Constitution, that meant the House of Representatives would decide the outcome of the presidential race. Hamilton and Federalists still had a chance to keep Jefferson out of the brand new White House.
This has produced great dismay and gloom on the Republican gentlemen here, and equal exultation in the Federalists, who openly declare they will prevent an election.
Nevertheless, both Burr and Hamilton found themselves estranged from their respective parties. The election of 1800 had left them bruised and battered, wielding little or no power. Each was looking for a way to put his life back on track, and each had reason to blame the other for their political derailment. It wouldn't be long before their simmering grudge match escalated into a final confrontation.
On November 23, 1801, a Hamilton was in a duel, not Alex, but his 23-year-old son Philip. This encounter would be the death of Alex's eldest son and foreshadow the Hamilton-Burr encounter 3 years later. After this, Hamilton would fall deeper into despair than he could ever imagine.
Alex spent the night before the duel in the city. Me and our children were home at the Grange. In the early night, he wrote a short letter to give me the event of his death. In this note, he explained why he did not shoot first.
The scruples of a Christian have determined me to expose my own life to any extent rather than subject myself to the guilt of taking the life of another. But you had rather I should die innocent than live guilty.
It was a bit before 7:30 in the morning on Wednesday, July 11th, 1804. The spot in Weehawken, New Jersey, was a secluded location. What happened there could only be observed by the duelists and their seconds.
Hamilton finished fiddling with his glasses. He and I now stood 30 feet apart with loaded pistols in our hands. Our seconds, Van Ness and Pendleton, stood to the sides. Dr. David Hozak, Hamilton's personal physician, stayed by the boats so he couldn't see what happened and not be eligible to testify on what happened.
Pendleton checked if both men were ready one last time. Then he shouted,
Present!
What happened after is unknown. Did Burr shoot first? Did Hamilton betray his promise? We will never know.
When Burr pulled the trigger of the Wagden dueling pistol held in his right hand, it sparked an explosion that propelled a .54 caliber lead ball out of the muzzle at a speed of approximately 545 miles per hour. The ball was less than 1 ounce. It traveled the 30 feet between Burr and Hamilton in less than a 20th of a second.
It ripped through Hamilton's waistcoat and shirt, ripped through the skin into his abdomen, then glanced off his rib. Now going in a new direction, it plowed through his liver, causing irreparable damage before lodging into one of his vertebrae.
After a few seconds of time, Colonel Burr fired, and instantly General Hamilton fell.
Van Ness later asked Burr why he waited
What
so
happened
long.
during the duel? What took so long?
The smoke of Mr. Hamilton's blow obscured my sight.
Thank you. Have a good day, sir.
Why did he have to go this way? Why couldn't he step down? First Philip, now Alex?
It's okay, Eliza. History has its eyes on them. No one can change who lives and who dies, but we can sure tell their story.